everybody. Thank you for coming to the 6th Community Forum about the Hamilton Wenham Elementary School project. Really tough night with rain here, but we'll go through the process so that we have this recorded and we can share it with people and people get the same answers. Tonight will be a little bit different in format, where the agenda looks short. We'll do a quick project overview, but we've seen a number of questions being asked consistently over and over and over, and we wanted to address those and make sure that everybody heard the same answers. We'll also send out a flyer soon that will have even more expanded answers than what we may have tonight. Certainly encourage people, once we get through the presentation, we'll open it up for questions and ask questions, dig into anything you need to. We do have representatives from JCJ, our architectural design firm, and PMA, our owner's project manager, and at least one FinCom member, 2 select board members. So we have some people here in the room that can also help us with any questions if we get stuck. We all remember this picture, and I think people have seen it over and over and over, but I thought it was important to just bring it back around since it's been a while. This is what we're trying to build, and how we look in a render, and then this space here is that overhead view, looking at the roads and parking and all of the play space. And one of the things that came up over and over and over was the road around the building, which is in blue. And that road is 25 feet wide. It is not a single car road, it's 25 feet wide. And it should hold between 30 and 40 cars, if not more, given the traffic situation. So that's an opportunity for us to take a number of cars off the street. There was a full traffic study done, and there are 280 something pages that are available on our website. If you want to dig into that, it actually studies not only outside of the building itself, but also all the way down towards the square where the police station and the senior center are. So some good information there, and it really talks about some of the things that came up early on that were addressed by the design team and the landscape team. I think one of the opportunities that I want to take is the MSBA reviewed us early on and reviewed the ed plan and came right out and said this is probably one of the best ed plans they've ever seen. And it's related to what our design crew came up with, how they've linked it to the ed plan. And I think the quote, this project is a nice balance of small neighborhood scale sharing resources and school cultures, which is really what this project's all about. So I want to jump right in. I'm going to really do this differently, and we're going to just throw the questions out there for you and give you some answers. And if you want some clarifications, please feel free to ask. But how did we get here, and did we consider renovations? So this idea of consolidation started well before me. I did some research and got all the way back to 2008. There were a number of studies done along the way, and one of the things that we are very good at here in Hamilton Wenham is paying for studies but never executing. So we're going to execute this one way or another. It's important for us to answer the question of how far back does this go. 2014, there was a strategic plan done for the district. That strategic plan stated that consolidation would be a good option for our elementary schools. So go back to 2008 when those conversations started, 2014. I happened to be here, I was involved in those visioning sessions, and then that really went away for a little while, and we continued to submit our plans to the MSBA, our SOIs, our Statement of Interests. Starting in 2018, we kept applying from there. We finally got accepted in 2022, so think about that. We're in 2025 already. 2022, we started this process, we got accepted, we jumped into the fire, we got approval, we got $1.25 million approved from the towns to move forward to study all the options available. Excuse me. From there, we did the ed plan. That was in 2023, and that ed plan consisted of a number of visiting sessions and a whole bunch of writing by people both on the design team, the owner's project manager team, and the teams related to the schools. Special ed people, we brought in our specialists so that we understood how we wanted to meet the needs of all of our kids. We brought in anybody that had any expertise in what we needed and how much, kind of space. And then each of the groups had a conversation with the design team, and that really led to, okay, what do you need? What would you really want? What do you need? And what really aligns with the vision. And then the school building explored, and this is important. This is probably the most important piece, because you hear a lot about the idea of renovation. Was renovation explored? Yes. Part of this was there were 3 design categories that were explored from the start: renovation, addition and renovation, and then a new construction. 3 design categories: renovation, addition and renovation, and then new design, new construction. Out of that sprung out a huge suite of sites for potential building of a school, and at that time we weren't wed to any size or shape. We were just looking for places to build a school. And our team went through over 30 and came up with really 20 that needed to be studied because they were possibilities based on size. Some of them were vetted out really quickly because they were landlocked, or they were swamp, or they were wetlands, or whatever. So 24 potential sites were looked at, and through that process we came back to the 2 elementary sites that we had as good, clean, viable sites that were already being used as schools. There were 14 design options. 14 design options, both involving the Winthrop, the Cutler alone, the Cutler and the Winthrop combination, and even building a new Cutler on the Winthrop property. So there were 14 options that all consisted of the possibilities that were mentioned in the 3 design categories of renovation, addition, and new building. Of those 14 design options, the school building committee and the design team and the owner's project manager slowly chipped away at each of those design options to determine which ones would meet the needs of our ed plan. The ed plan. The ed plan has been described as a pie in the sky document. That is not true. That is actually what we need to function in this district so that all kids are properly educated. Taking kids out of closets, taking kids out of hallways, taking kids and adults out of spaces that were never designed for education. It gives us the opportunity to integrate our classes. So for example, first grade classes, there are 7. Those 7 classes could be together. They could work together, grow together. They could be integrated with older kids for mentor opportunities. So we looked at all the things we currently do in these small scale schools and brought them into the greater design. Which is cheaper, renovating 2 schools or building 1 consolidated school? Is there a viable plan that will cost taxpayers less? We've done the math. Both FinComs have done the math and come to the same conclusions. So during this process, the initial estimates for upgrading and updating, which is called base repairs, which is ADA compliance and bringing it up to code, if you will. The Winthrop and Cutler, the Cutler was $48.6 million approximately, and then the Winthrop is $49 million. Neither of those numbers qualify for reimbursement from the state. ADA compliance and base code repairs do not qualify for reimbursement by the state. Why? Because there are a number of boxes that you need to check through the process, including making your rooms the appropriate size. Base code repair would not change the size of any space. It would just bring it up to date, up to code, and then up to compliance. So that number is $97.6 million. I'm guessing it's probably different today, considering, remember when we started, 2022, or 3 years later. Schematic design, we did the preferred solution, which was option C4, which was a new Cutler, Winthrop, in Bucher, technically, where we're including all of those kids in 1st through 5th grade as well, at $142 million. This option gives us the $49.8 million for reimbursement and approximately $92 million to the taxpayers. The reality of that number is we have elected through the school building committee to use what's called CM at risk, construction manager at risk, which means you hire a construction agent, construction company, and that company and the school building committee negotiate to that guaranteed price, which is $142 million. All right. So that's an important piece to understand. The construction manager at risk takes the risk of the property, knowing we've toured with these groups, we've had them meet with the designers, OPMs, so that they can get an idea of what's real on that site. Like, okay, where is the ledge? Where they can look at the borings, they can look at everything that we've done, and decide if their company wants to take that risk at that guaranteed maximum price, GMP, $142-ish million. So that's really where everybody has come down to as being less. The code repairs, base upgrade, ADA compliance does not give me the opportunity to educate all of our kids and have our teachers in classrooms where they should be. Just point blank. Renovation and addition, we could do that. It was hard to do and include so many of our kids. People have said, well, couldn't you have renovated and done an addition to kind of meet the needs? We did look at that. The school building committee decided no. That is not the way to go. So those options were, go back to that previous slide, 14 options. The school building committee looked at those options, weighed those options, looked at what we had. One of our most vulnerable populations, our preschool children, really didn't fit into any equations because preschool programs do not get reimbursed at all. So if we decided to do what Manchester Essex did and build space for preschool, we would pay for 100% of that. Which is, it's something we could have done, but we knew if we combined Winthrop and Cutler, moved our kids out of Bucher, we have the perfect spot for our kids in preschool and kindergarten. If we vote no on the new consolidated school, can we change the scope of the work to use MSBA funding to renovate instead? The answer is no. It just ends the project. My conversation with MSBA and several superintendents who've been through failed projects, the MSBA wants to spend their money. They do not want to wait around. They will give extensions oftentimes. They want to put their money to work, so they'll move it to places, communities, that have a higher chance of gaining a vote or are already moving towards building a project. The cost escalation is an important factor here. The real example, if you will, is right next door in Ipswich. 2018, $72 million consolidated elementary school for just over 800 kids. Close to what we were looking at. $72 million in 2018. In the fall, this past fall of 2024, they were accepted back into the program with MSBA. And they're looking at estimated prices that exceed $160 million for the same exact thing. That's a huge risk to take for a community. So that, the reality is, how long can we wait knowing things like cost escalation, tariffs, and things are on the table now and in the near future? Oh yeah. Thank you. Doug just reminded me of something. Also, if you go through feasibility one time, like we just finished feasibility and finished that first couple of modules in the MSBA program, and we voted no, and we shut down this project, done, move on. If we apply in say we apply from 2 years from now and get accepted, feasibility is at our expense, 100%. So right now, in the bank, I have $515,000 that's been reimbursed from the state already of the $1.25 million that was put on the table originally. And when you think about it, we've been able to take that $1.25 million and really turn it into $49 million coming back from the state. That's an important factor in this. The escalation factors are real, but also things change. The state's not going to continue to reimburse. Well, here's another feasibility at $1 million and we'll put in our share. They stop after the first time. This is a fun one. I actually talked to the superintendent. He's in my superintendent's roundtable. So if the Welch School in Peabody was renovated with MSBA funding, why can't we? Probably should have said, why can't we renovate as well? So Welch School, I happen to know well. I worked in Peabody for a number of years. Welch School was at the appropriate sizes. So there are minimum standard sizes that the MSBA accepts and will reimburse. If you do not get your classrooms to that 950 square foot minimum, I believe, they do not want any involvement in your reimbursement. So therefore, the renovation, kind of cleaning up of things with an 800 square foot classroom gets zero reimbursement. So that's how things work differently in the Welch School. We are short of a lot of the MSBA standards, classroom sizes. If you walk through our elementary schools, there's no consistency in size. There's some big ones, there's some little ones, there's some medium-sized ones, there's some corner ones. There are additions put on that get closer to the expected size, but the MSBA is very formulaic about how they reimburse money for these projects. The other thing with the Welch School is, when they were working on that project, the average square foot price to build that building was $484, I believe. $454, thank you. $454 per square foot when they built that. Ours right now is leaning into $900 per square foot. That's the project now, just a few years later. So remember, these projects don't start the year before they're built. And we just kind of laid that out. We got accepted in 2022. It's 2025, and we're still in the basic stages. We haven't gone into design. And that would be next if we get approved to move forward. So that's kind of the big differences. Those projects can't be compared. There's a lot of other opportunities across the state to look at who's renovating, who's not, who's consolidating, who's not. There's a lot of consolidation going on in the number of communities around. The people that we work with and several of the builders that we interviewed are involved in a number of consolidations as well. So that's really where people are looking for efficiencies. Can we change the ED plan to make renovation of our existing schools possible with MSBA funding? So the short answer is no. If you go in and change the ED plan to fit something that's not what you need, the MSBA will not buy into that. So we have an ED plan that is designed around the needs of our children, all of them, pre-K through 5, gives them an opportunity to be in spaces that are clean, bright, well ventilated, enough room to be in for whatever services kids need, or whatever opportunities kids can have in schools. And schools are very different. Schools in the 1950s did not plan for having specialized programs in buildings. In fact, in many schools, those kids weren't in the school district. School district, most of those kids were sent out if they needed a specialized program. 50s, 60s, 70s, things started changing, 80s, 90s, it grew. Now we have programs. We have the CASEL program, the ILP program, TLC program, language-based program, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language, all have to occur somewhere. So you have this little elementary school that was designed for 12 classrooms, and that was it. Where do you put all these other features? And I didn't even talk about interventions. We're still working intervention programs to get our kids up and above the COVID mess, if you will, So functionally, still working to try to intervene at every single level of our district, using data, looking at data, and trying to intervene. Where do those interventions occur? In the hallways, in closets, on stages. That's why our ed plan is designed the way it is. If you downgrade the educational plan, I think the MSBA would get a little suspicious and say, wait a minute, this is what you said you need, you don't need it anymore. And that would be another red flag for them to say, maybe you want to go back to the drawing board and think about it and start over. And starting over again, you don't get reimbursed for that first few stages, feasibility and schematic design, which in our case, this time around was $1.2 million. So those are some other things to think about. Don't our elementary schools serve the needs of our students just fine? We just talked about that. We just really talked about that. The idea of school in 2025 is very different than school in 1980, 1970, 1960. These programs that our children need, that we need to keep our kids in our schools, need space. They need facilities. They need water. They need toilets. They need all the things that kids need when they're in school. They need space for art supplies. They need space for music and musical instruments. They need space for technology. Many of our buildings don't have enough electricity to handle some of the increases in technology that we'll need over the next 15 years. The best example is the high school right now. I'm replacing the boilers in the high school. Well, I personally am not, but being deeply involved in it, the boilers in the high school, if we move them to all electric boilers, we would have to bring in more power from the street at an additional cost of $600,000. So think about that as we continue down the road to renovating these small schools that don't meet our needs. And as I said, the programs for me are important because if you were in one of our specialized programs 30 years ago, you would not be in your local public school. Kids in our communities deserve to go to school in our communities. Point blank. There's no other way to say it. It's important for us to understand that the ed plan, as lofty as some people may think it is, really is designed to meet the needs of our kids and our faculty now. And it may change, and I think the flexibility that our designers have built into this new building are going to be amazing for kids to move around, kids to interact, kids to be outside, kids to be inside, and keep as many kids as we can in our community schools. My favorite one, the 3A question, why was the Winthrop School not considered? Was it because Hamilton wants to develop the property for 3A? I started here 12 years ago and that conversation was already happening. The Winthrop property was on the table several years before that as a possibility. In fact, in 2016, there was a study done in Hamilton of a number of sites to meet the needs of low-income housing, the 10% requirement for low-income housing. And the town of Hamilton had done this, I forget how many sites, but there were a number of sites looked at. And they looked at, okay, what if you had X amount of apartments here or multifamilies here? What would that look like? One of them that was considered was the Winthrop property. There was a consideration to say, oh, let's put those apartments in the back of the Winthrop property where there's some space, and we'll have them drive in and out of what is now known as the Tally Ho neighborhood. That was on the table in 2016. It was quickly off the table at a meeting of the same group when they considered, okay, does this make sense? Is it absolutely not? For all the reasons we're talking about, like emptying into a neighborhood, in a school, in the backyard of a school. So there has been studies and conversations about the Winthrop property, and I think it's important to note that in many meetings, including the one that Dana, Alara, and I, and Dave Polito were at a few weeks ago, though people had started that conversation again, Town of Hamilton's been very clear. That property is not included in the 3A zoning conversation. Not at all. If you looked at the newspaper, I think it's up here. Yeah, volume 1, issue 21 of the HW News. There was a great little map that showed where the actual outline of the Hamilton 3A zoning conversation will be occurring. That outline does not include the Winthrop School. The Winthrop School was not originally identified by the MSBA. At the time, the person who was in charge of facilities, myself, I think Dave Polito was involved, a school committee member, had a conversation with the MSBA and said, can we look at our other schools while you're here, looking at the Cutler? They agreed and went to all 3 elementary schools with us, and then went back to their group, and they gave us the option of saying, if you'd like to consolidate the Winthrop and the Cutler, we would agree with that, but the initial invitation is for the Cutler School property. So that's how we initially kind of launched. It was the Cutler School property, and then through conversations and tours of our schools, the MSBA realized the Winthrop School is also in dire straits and could use some help. So the consolidation was one of the design options that they approved when they came back to us after our invitation. Once that consolidation was approved, people have said, oh, see, it happened right here. But that consolidation conversation had happened years and years before. And then the site limitations on Winthrop School, if we had got the opportunity to build a new Winthrop School, it would be phased because there isn't as much space as you see on the property. So we were saying, all right, what if we consolidated, but then put that on the Winthrop site? It would have been probably $15 to $18 million more because we'd have to phase the build. If we said we're going to build a brand new property and it's going to phase in, it would have been much more money. I think it was at $160 million when we first looked at it. And the reason being is because you can't just, like the Cutler site, you can build the building and the kids can stay in the other building while the new building's being built. You can't do that on the Winthrop site. Having been through that type of a project, again at Peabody High many years ago, they did a 6-phase renovation while kids were in school with, I think we had a dozen modular units outside, so you had to lengthen your day to keep kids tired to get to classes. Elementary kids would have the same issue and experiences. We would have modular units on the site, and we would do a piece of the building at a time, kind of grow it around over multiple stages. That's where it gets expensive. Modular units run about $250,000, roughly, each, and you're gonna need more than one. You know, they depending on where you locate them, whether you buy them, whether you lease them, who's hooking up the electricity, the water, all the needs for that particular modular unit. So those expenses get really high really fast because it's generally one modular unit per class. Yeah, and modular units have 0 reimbursement. Thank you. You're gonna jump right up there. Go ahead.
Do I have to state my name and where?
You should. Yeah, you should.
Okay. Hi everyone, and online, I'm Julie Lineker. I'm a Hamilton resident. I feel like, it's not that I feel, I have had personal conversations with parents and individuals who are concerned about and wanting to have Winthrop be the site of the new school, whether it is a rebuild, renovation, or consolidation. So there's a few questions that I'd like to ask. I think one is, I don't know if you can answer this or somebody here can answer it, about the health risks, knowing what is at Winthrop, the health risks that happen over the years, what the renovation would be if students are there in a phased space. And just what that timeline is going to be like and the impact of that for kids over that timeline. I think those are the first 2 questions I have.
Sure. The hard answer, tough one answer is your first question, the health impacts, because we don't always know what's in the buildings until we get into them. They did some testing around the Cutler School, and they do, you know, pieces of, oh, let's test a piece of the floor. Let's test this, let's test that. So they do testing initially. In some spaces, you open something up that was a renovation 50 years ago, and you find something else that you didn't know was behind there. So it's hard to even know what you're going into. Generally around schools, they also do soil sampling to see what kinds of chemicals may be in the soils. In a project I did at Wilmington many years ago, there was an oil tank in the courtyard that everybody knew was there, but didn't know it had oil in it. So those are kind of surprises that come up. So there are certainly risks that have to be mitigated. The builders do a lot of work to mitigate those risks. They use a lot of negative flow processes through the building process to keep kids safe and keep kids healthy. But it's a work site. It's a work site. There's no guarantees of any, oh, there's not gonna be any dust coming in. That's not true. I mean, in the PV High project, I saw a wall get taken out with a classroom there. So those things happen. And it's really a difficult thing to say this and this and this could exactly happen, but there certainly are things that we would work to mitigate right away, but there are also things that could appear that we would not know is there when we do the renovation. Do you want to add to that? Or?
No, you answered it great. It's a good question. And it happens on every renovation project. We plan for the worst, hope for the best. And there's mitigation planning, and we have allowances and holds of money in case something happens. But we don't know what's behind these walls. We don't know what can happen. So the common things are dust and airborne, and we do things like negative air infiltration to keep them out. But anyone who's ever, painted a room, or done your kitchen over, all the plastic in the world, some still gets through, right? And then we have to be reactive. But one of the biggest things is interruptions to learning. Construction is disruptive and it's noisy. And there really is no way to mitigate that other than working at night. And then the cost of that school would go through the roof. There's a prevailing wage / union rate job. It's not like a typical house in Hamilton or Wenham. The hourly cost and the premium to work at night is incredible. And almost unaffordable. So it's disruption to learning, and kids are resilient, and they do like looking, but everyone's got that kid that needs quiet in a room, that there's any noise, they're looking the other way and not doing their test. So it's the intangibles, things like that, you really can't put a cost on, but it's just very disruptive. Now again, better living through engineering and planning, we're gonna address it and make it work, but it's not the ideal situation, and it will take a minimum of a year longer, at least, because it ends up being a block it off, either tear it down or gut it, rebuild it, move them, then start over again in this section. And that just adds time, and everybody knows, again, time is money. The longer it takes, you get into another construction year, you get more escalation, it costs more money. So ultimately, all of that was thought of and costed out, as we said, in all these options. We looked at the ad renovation costs for the winter and the disruption to the kids. And the process bore out that it was more economically feasible and better for the kids to stay at home.
What was your last question?
Yeah, so I think it's connected, and so it's the timeline of what that would be like when you're having to do the modulars and having to do the phases. And so I'm just thinking about the impact on learning for however many years of students that is, because it would be happening, the construction site would be the school, and what that not only would be the impact on our bottom dollar and our wallets, but the impact and cost of students' learning and well-being. So what's the timeline and really what is the cost of what that would be if we did this at the Winthrop School?
So the timeline is, as I touched on earlier, to do an ad renovation of and end up at a similar size with a similar enrollment would add a minimum of a year to a year and a half. This is already a 2-year project.
2-year project.
2-year project just to build it new. And we just, one you may be familiar with, and it's not the same size, but it gets to the point, is we did Somerville High School, and it ended up being a ad renovation / new, and it took 7 years. Because, and I built Saugus Middle High School, you probably drive by that on the highway, that only took 26 months to build new. And the difference is, as I said, you have to protect the rest of the property you're not touching, abate the hazardous materials of what's in it, then you gut it or tear it down, build it up, then you start all over again. And then, oop, we don't have enough room yet because we haven't renovated enough space, put them out in the parking lot in modulars. Adds time. So for every year you add, at a minimum, it's 5% that we have in our estimate, a 5% escalation of all construction costs. That's a minimum that any third-party professional estimator will give you. Now, not to alarm anyone, because we planned that for this project. Our costs are escalating. We have contingencies, we have design contingencies, we have construction change order contingencies, and that was all anticipated and projected through the midpoint of construction. So we've accounted for that. But I don't think anyone can tell you what the price of a gallon of gas is going to be in 4 years. So once you get outside that 1 year window, we're going to have to overinflate to protect the town, the estimates. And the cost will escalate well beyond that 5% per year, well beyond it. And you can talk about the education.
Yeah, and you know, you're dealing with our youngest, most vulnerable learners. They're gonna move several times throughout that 3-year period. So if you're a first grader, you probably would move 7 or 8 times, either into a modular or into another space, depending on, you know, which grade you're in, how many years this thing goes on. So a new build would be about 2 years. That kind of type of a reno update where it's phased in, or even a new, if they were building a new building on the Winthrop site, would have to be phased. And our initial estimates were up in the $160 million range. And it was for all those reasons, disruptions to learning. It's disruption to things like drop off and pickup. You're moving them around as you're moving the construction site around, because there's only so much space that you can put all this equipment.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
MSBA calls it cost-effective and educationally appropriate. That's their goal, is for us to come to a solution that meets their goal as well. And actually, that's the town as well. This is not on the high end of school construction costs, particularly elementary schools, as Eric pointed out before. We're in a good time right now. As everyone reads the newspaper knows what's going on in the world, and there's threats of this and threats of that, but we built that contingency into the project, and we're comfortable that when we bring our construction manager on board, that'll be the next step. One piece Eric left out is this great part about construction manager at risk. We don't have to wait until the job is 100% designed to start costing things out and getting actual bids. We bring the firm that's going to be responsible for building the project on now during design development, and they're going to lend their expertise to the OPM and the designer to say, that looks great on paper, but this is really how you build it. Or that's a great product, but did you know it comes from China now, and we can source that in the United States and save 8% on that material. So that's the process that we're going to undergo to make it economically appropriate for the town, for the towns.
Thank you. This is also one of my favorites. And there are major drainage wetland issues that will be impacted by building a new school on the Cutler property, and have mitigation costs for septic and drainage been considered? Yes. The things out on Facebook recently have cited that it's going to cost between $30 and $50 million to address the mitigation, septic, and sewage. That is not realistic. This is my 3rd building project. I have a lot of faith in the professionals who do this work. They do schools generally because they consistently do schools. They know what they're talking about. The advantage, I think, is that LGCI and Samiotis, 2 of the engineering groups that were brought in to do the examination of the properties, they did the borings, they did, what's it called, the test pit. Yeah, they did a test pit where they actually left the pit open and measured the water over a multi-month period to try to see what would go on. And somebody said, well, you hit water, see there's water on the property. Well, that's how wells work. There's water on properties. You drill a hole to a certain depth and you're bound to get water. And that's my property, your property, there's probably water at some depth underneath our property. Some shallow, some deep. So the reality is, The opportunity that we have would be to improve what's happening on that site. If you go there, there's a lot of water that comes down to the left side, and goes in the drain and goes into the wetlands. There's a lot of opportunity for them to bring in 2025 systems that manage water. We have groups in town who help us with that, Planning Board, Conservation Commission, and they would help us to kind of say, okay, what does that look like? How's it gonna work? How does this system treat the water before it goes into the system? Believe it or not, that's what would happen in a new building. There would be a design system that would treat the runoff of water before it enters down, at the bottom of the hill to the sewer or the wetlands. So that's an important piece of it. We would actually improve what's happening now. Septic systems, there are 2 septic systems on that property now. We have, there's money in the budget for both mitigation of stormwater renewal, and then septic systems being redone and rebuilt in similar places, actually bottom left and bottom right of that property. So there is a plenty that has been done. The stormwater management piece is an important gain, I think, if anything, I think it's a gain in the project, given what's happening there on that site now.
Can I just jump into that? Of course. The whole premise that we found water, we found water. You drive in this town, we know you have water. You have lakes and streams, and you have a reservoir, and the other part is, well, I lost my train of thought. We found water. Found water. We weren't surprised to find it. We went looking for it. That's part of the normal engineering process, is we know there's water in this town. Let's find out where it is on this site, see at what depth it's at, and will it cause a problem, and will it be a premium that makes that site not advantageous? Previous slide, we went through, how many sites? I forget now, 24 sites. And a lot of them came off the table right away because we did our due diligence with online DEP mapping, water resources mappings, it's available to anybody, and said, whoop, water resource area, nope, wetland, drops off, drops off, drops off. Couple did not, because it did not have wetlands on the site. There's wetlands down the street, across the street, there's wetlands across the street. So we went and found the water to see how deep it was and said, okay, can we design the septic? And can we design a drainage system that will not increase any water runoff to the properties after we're done? And the answer was yes, through professional engineering studies and site investigation. So that was put to bed. Now, further that, when the CMR comes on board, we have 2 other permits that we have to apply for and obtain. NPDES permit, NPDES is a national pollution permit about stormwater runoff, and then a SWIP plan, SWPP, stormwater prevention pollution plan. So there's all these other safeties that are built in when the contractor that has to, when it comes on board, has to comply with, so there's no additional drainage and runoff going to the neighbors' properties. So, well investigated.
Thank you, Coach. This one bubbled up recently. Isn't there enough space to move some elementary grades to the middle school and shift 8th grade to the high school? Well, having been to all of our schools every week, there are no empty classrooms in the middle school or the high school. There are none. That was, somebody said, oh, our numbers have gone down over time, our class sizes have gone down. We do have space in our classrooms, which is why we use the choice program in 9th grade. So we fill seats, just like we're filling seats on a plane. The school committee approves that annually, well, or could disapprove it annually, but it has to be approved or disapproved annually, and we've continued to do that to fill space. Our elementary schools are stuffed, to put it bluntly. Like you have 3 elementary schools that are doing everything they can with every piece of real estate they can. If we tried to take the 130-ish 5th graders up to the middle school, that would shrink down the use of the current classrooms and increase the classrooms sizes to 25 to above 30 in some instances of middle school kids, and would take away options. So levels of classes, like accelerated math versus the regular math, you wouldn't be able to do that because you wouldn't have spaces to do that throughout the school day. And that's, you know, a problematic move for parents. I've seen it in a number of towns. Moving 5th grade to the middle school does become a firestorm, and that's, you know, something that's an important conversation to have well before you start to think about doing that, so that everybody can get their thoughts on the table. That is a big move for a lot of parents. You'd have to really do something with some of the facilities, depending on how you did it, where you would move some, locate them, because in any school district I've been involved in, if there's been a move of moving elementary age kids to an elementary school, people want them separated. To separate them in our very basic middle school, 2 floors, 2 straight floors. Where do you put them is really the question. Keep away from the older kids, and you know, those are all things that we would have to address in this type of a plan. And the high school especially is not designed to accommodate younger grades. If you've been to the elementary schools, the toilets are much smaller, lower to the ground. That's not the case here at the high school or the middle school, so those things, you know, some little things that we'd have to think about. Staffing, we'd be moving staffing around some more. Some of the, you know, staffing that addresses elementary school and works with elementary school, our staff is certified by grade level. So when you start to say, oh, you're in elementary school, you're generally pre-K to 6 or K to 6 or 1 to 6 certified. That really holds you within that window. Same with middle school and high school. Certifications are for those grade levels. When you start moving people around, you start running into trouble with, oh, I need a 5th grade teacher for English for 2 periods, and I'm not sure how to do that. So you have to have somebody who would work in one of the elementary schools and move to the middle school partway through the day to finish out their day. So that creates just a different issue. And then really, it doesn't solve the problem of what is going on in our elementary schools. It doesn't solve any of our problems. It doesn't give us the spaces that we need. You know, we could get some more classrooms, but if you were paying attention last week to Winthrop School, we had to make the decision to collapse our incoming 1st grade. So our current kindergarten class is a little bit smaller than they've been. So instead of having 7, we're gonna collapse them down to 6 because we need the teacher to split our Castle program into 2 different rooms. And that's because of the law. You can't have kids in specialized programs with more than a 48-month spread in age. So as soon as I have a 1st grader and a 5th grader, I gotta start looking at ages, and as soon as it crosses 48 months, I have to separate them into 2 programs. So that's what's gonna happen next year. You know, it's a game for us. We moved that bubble around. Next year, the kindergarten bubble is going to Cutler, and they're gonna displace a whole group of people who are in an office that do interventions. It's just it's the only space we have. So those are the things that we're running into right now today, and that, you know, those are the things that you never want to move children around if you don't have to, but we're in that kind of mode of trying to move kids around so that we have the appropriate spaces for programs for these kids. And certainly we have Q&A time. If you have questions, we will answer them. If you have wonders, please come up to the mic or we can pass it around. And project website is on your left, the QR code there. And then a separate document report section on the right side. Any document that we've talked about tonight, including the reports from Semiotis, LGCI, which are related to the stormwater, groundwater, the boring, any of the sites related to transportation, any of the traffic studies are all located on that right side. There are many, many more. There's probably, I'm gonna guess, about 6,000 pages of documents in the 3 submissions that we sent to the state. So there's a lot of information out there related to the project, and we haven't gotten to design yet. Do you have a question?
Yeah, please. Hi, Scott Patterson from Hamilton. 2 questions. One, John McGrath is here from, he's the chair of the Hamilton FinCom, and I have a question for him. Last night I know you voted unanimously in support of the project again, which is great. Thank you very much for that. Hopefully one of them does that at their FinCom meeting next week. But in your discussion, you talked a little bit about, well, if it doesn't pass, and you provided a new summary of what is going to go in the warrant article. Can you give us some insight to that? Things related to Prop 2.5 overrides or large amounts of immediate maintenance, those things that you talked about last night?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Just as a preamble to this, as a member of the FinCom, I had the opportunity to be part of the school building committee, but not a voting member. And as such, I was able to sit through all the meetings. I think I asked more questions than anybody of these folks and all the other people.
I put it down as a defendant.
And the role that I tried to serve on that committee was listen and sort of test what I was hearing. Many times I would take my notes and go back and get on the web and look up stuff. For example, why did the end plan drive a larger footprint? Just Google it. It's clear that we need more space. The analogy, as an example, is look what happened to the average house size since 1950. It's pretty much doubled. So the role that both FinCom served in that committee was one of pressing, asking questions, asking more questions, see if it made sense, go ask an expert. Almost every time I did that, the discussions held up, the facts were provable, and I believe when a vote was finally made, they made a good decision. So that's just a qualifier. When we started to reconsider, to answer your question, to reconsider this next vote, the one question we asked ourselves on FinCom was, what's likely to happen if we don't vote the new school? Probably next April, there'll be a $15 million override to spend money to do some critical improvements. If it gets voted no, a planning process will start almost immediately between the school committee and the town boards. What should we do? Probably in a special town meeting in 26, in October, there'll probably be a couple of large overrides coming from the schools to start spending tens of millions of dollars on the schools. I have no idea what that plan looks like. Those overrides will probably happen over multiple years. And today we just posted yet another 30-page book recommendations on the town website for everyone to consume. You can kind of go through it all. I was surprised, actually, how many people I talked to who didn't read the first 30-page document that we wrote up. But anyway, if you go through that material, what you'll find is a restatement and a testing of all the facts that were accumulated over the 2 years. What we're really trying to do is protect the taxpayers by questioning almost everything that was done and trying to answer every question that was raised. So we firmly believe that not letting that $50 million slip through our fingers is the right decision. If that $50 million slips away, there's an implied $2.5 million penalty every year because we let it get away from us. So I really put a lot of emphasis on don't lose that $50 million, grab it and put it to good use now. And that is in the best interest of the taxpayers of both towns. That's our thought.
Thank you, John. John McGrath, the Hamilton FinCom Chair.
Yeah, one more question for you, Eric. And actually, I think the Ipswich numbers bear out. It's over $10 million a year is what it's cost them in their delay. So the numbers are huge. One more about like kind of a community benefit that comes from this. And when Cutler, both Cutler and with the schools they're not really useful for recreational purposes much for the town. But inside, in terms of the gyms, outside, there's some available stuff that's there. So this new school's good. We're busted at the seams in the town for recreational demand. Pingree Park is a recreational facility, Patton Park's a recreational facility. We're doing everything we can at this site, and there's just more that's demanded, especially for young folks. So what are some of the things we get out of the new school to cover?
Yeah, the bonus, if you will, is we really have developed a community center. So the way that the building's designed is you have the academic areas that can be closed off from what we call the community areas, and that was part of our visioning. The community areas were important because we do have our buildings used by youth sports generally. We have a badminton team that comes in weekly, we have cheerleading, we have basketball, we host a town meeting, so there's all kinds of things that are occurring in our elementary schools outside of the school day, but limited because those elementary school gyms are small. They're small spaces, or they're combination spaces where they're auditoriums and cafeterias or auditoriums and gyms. We can't use those spaces oftentimes. One of our best connections is with the community house. Community house right across the street from the Winthrop School, actually used as part of the Winthrop School because of the number of kids that need after school programming. They also do theater program, and part of that was, hey, we could use the stage at the Winthrop School, but you can't because it's a classroom. So you'd have to empty out this classroom every time you wanted to use the stage. So those are some of the realities that we would solve. The way it's designed with the cafeteria, the gym, and the auditorium, the stage space, are all in one line, and they're all open for and available for people to utilize. There are private spaces, quiet spaces. You can open up a wall between the cafeteria and the gymnasium and do a gigantic community function, which I think is important in our small towns. There's a stage right there that would not be used for a classroom because it is, we have built in the classrooms that we would need and that we could use down the road. So I think the huge piece of that is the school districts often close their buildings down at the end of the school day, and that's it. I think it's important for us to find spaces, as Scott said, for our kids. It's the reason we did the high school athletic facilities improvement project, to give more space and time for kids, not just high school kids, middle school, youth sports, to get on our fields and find places to play and be outside. So that's really kind of driving that. There's still a baseball field, there's 5 soccer fields on this property, plenty of space for kids to get out and play. There's playgrounds, play yards, the spaces that kids can use for classrooms and also for play and learning. So it gives us a lot more opportunity to kind of move kids in and out of the building, but also to move public in and out of the building without disrupting any of the academic areas. So that's it.
Hi, Laura Bittler from School Street in Hamilton. Thank you so much, Eric. This has been extremely informative. I have one question that I've heard a lot around transportation and busing and how that's related to traffic. So could you just elaborate a little bit on the plans for the changes in transportation at the new consolidated school and what that will mean for students? I know my son personally rides the transfer bus right now, as you know, and I'd love you to just elaborate a little bit on how that changes what the current model is.
Sure. Transfer buses are the bane of my existence every year. It's like Jen Caulfield and I say, okay, how are we going to organize these? And then get the principals and secretaries involved. There are a lot of people involved to make sure kids can move around the district, and they are literally moving around the district. We've had some kids that get dropped at one school, they wait at one school, they get picked up by another bus, go to another school, wait at that school, and go to a third school in the morning and the afternoon. So transfer buses, we want to get rid of those and have a little more realistic transportation schedule. We hope to reduce the buses that we use. One of the realities is we use 14 regular buses throughout the day between high school and elementary. We don't use them all for both levels, but the high school kids are too cool to ride the bus, but, you know, but they all have cars actually. So it's a little bit less in the middle school, high school zone, but elementary school, a lot of kids take the bus. You know, there was a conversation about, oh, kids won't be able to walk to school anymore. Well, kids can walk to school, but many of our kids, I think 2/3 of our elementary school kids take the bus. So we still have to, you know, make plans for that. We actually just received a $5 million grant to electrify our buses. So that kind of solves the pollution issue that was out there. People in the community, the local area around the building were concerned about having a number of buses there every day. So reducing the number of buses, hopefully consolidating the routes around the communities, the two communities, and giving us an opportunity to get rid of, that transfer bus system that we use that is confusing for everybody, even this far into the school year.
All right, Ashley Levy Chase, Bridge Street, Hamilton. I've heard a lot of chatter about severely declining enrollment, and so why do we need a bigger space? I'm wondering if you can speak to what you're seeing in terms of enrollment trends, because at the same time, I'm also hearing that we already have 130 kids enrolled for kindergarten next year, so
You heard that?
if you could speak to that, that would be
Sure,
great.
absolutely. So 2 years ago, we had the second highest number of elementary schools in 12 years. Highest number we had over the 12 years that I've been monitoring it is 867. That was back before COVID. During COVID, the population dumped out. People went different ways, and then we recovered back to 847 2 years ago. Elementary aged kids, that's the kids who are pre-K to 5. So 847. Last year we had a little dip because we had one fewer preschool class. We've had 3 the year before. This year we have 2. And it's a smaller class, as I mentioned earlier. Kindergarten kids came in instead of the usual 130.1 average. It's currently, I think, 118. I think it's 118. And then we're looking at kindergarten class coming our way right now. Registrations at the time of year are usually about 120, 118, 120. They're over 130. With kids in the queue waiting, and families will come during the summer for move-ins and people that just waited to sign their kids up. So we're continuing to see growth at the elementary school level. Interestingly enough, I think we'll see a little bump too at the upper levels. Next year we have, at least I know of 7 kids who are transferring back into the high school in the fall from private schools. So we're starting to see some movement in our student body. Elementary is the one that concerns us the most because of that growth period. So it was up, then it was down a little bit through COVID, and coming out of COVID, we've gone up since 2020 every single year, except for this current year where there's one fewer pre-kindergarten classes. Does that answer that question? Okay.
Hi, Finn Sprague, Wenham, I'm the finance chair over at Wenham, but I'm talking just as a public, member of the public.
Just move closer to the mic.
Closer?
Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to get your take on a few things.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's my understanding, right, that if there's gonna be any investment in Cutler and Winthrop, you're gonna need a 2/3 vote from Hamilton voters and Wenham voters, basically for the foreseeable future. That's your understanding too?
The way the current regional agreement is written, yes.
Okay.
Current regional agreement calls for a 2/3 majority vote on debt exclusion.
So if we listen to what John was talking about a second ago, we're talking about a $15 million vote that will have to happen next year to basically replace just the HVAC systems in the 2 schools. And that's not part of the $90-some odd million of code compliance that's needed, right?
In both buildings.
Right. So if I understand what happens, if you are a person that wants to keep the neighborhood schools, you're gonna need to get 2/3 of Wenham voters to vote for an investment in Hamilton structures this coming year for $15 million, and then start working on those $90 million code compliance problem in each one of these schools. Again, another vote, get the Wenham voters to vote for this again and again and again. For how many different bites of that apple?
Right.
It's gonna be a decade of asking Wenham voters to, in a supermajority, vote for that.
And I think that was, if you go back, maybe I think it was the 4th forum I started talking about that. If you just kept your neighborhood school structure, as people may know, there's 1 school in Wenham. 1 school. And the other 4 in Hamilton. So as we said, okay, we're just gonna build a Cutler school, to the point of these gentlemen here. They're gonna build a Cutler school. Wenham voters, Hamilton voters go to the polls, they go to the town meeting, they voted in, and now they're in debt for something of $40 to $70 million for that particular project. 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years later, we go back to the MSBA and say, all right, we want to do the next school, which by the way, probably won't make it 7 years, but we're gonna do the Winthrop School, I'm just gonna pick the Winthrop School. We're gonna do the Winthrop School, and we're gonna go back and say, hey, Wenham voters, you wanna vote for the school in Hamilton again? And that might be difficult. That might be absolutely difficult. That's true. I think what you're bringing up is, no matter what, whether we're building a school or doing projects in the schools in wherever they may be located, Hamilton or Wenham or both. I think the beauty of our towns is we have the regional agreement that gives us the opportunity to work together on behalf of all of our kids to make sure that we can give all of our kids the best opportunities. But I think that's a real concern that I brought up earlier in these forums to say, how many times would Wenham come and vote for a Hamilton property? I don't know. I gotta put a roof on the high school. I'm putting more windows in the middle school. There are lots of projects coming our way, and I think, part of the bigger problem is you start stacking debt on top of debt, on top of debt, on top of debt. And that doesn't work out well when you look at it over a time period. I'll give you a quick example. This is just a quick example that we made up. I asked our business manager to make up. Everything to the left side is what's currently bonded out, we're already paying for, so the greens and the stuff under the green and that dark blue. The two bigger debt columns are a renovation to the Cutler School at $70 million, and then a renovation to the Winthrop School at $70 million. And I think what's important to note here, if you look at this graph, and then add on any other projects in town, including the water, here's your first debt of slightly under $9 million for the Cutler School, plus all the other debts you already are paying for. And then that goes out until FY39 when we say, okay, let's do the Winthrop School and add that on top. Your debt shoots to above $13 or $14 million. And that's a guess only because we're just using round numbers of 3.5% escalation over time. We're gonna stack that debt of the Cutler on top of that debt of the Winthrop, and that will take us all the way out to 57. 2057. And that's a long debt line when you start looking at all the other projects related to sewer and water in our communities, our high school roof, any other building needs that are in the communities, any other debt needs. On the other hand, there's your school for the consolidation. Same things on the bottom left, the debt we already have. Green is the athletic school, athletic complex, upgrades. So we're running around $2 million in debt for a few years. Then we add the debt on for the consolidated school. And this is figured on our original 150 million, so it's actually slightly less, but you can see how quickly the line comes down as the debt decreases over time. And then you're out to 48 instead of 57. You're starting to look at a little differently when you start stacking debt on top of debt. So when you look at just the Cutler and the Winthrop, what about the Bucher? By the time you get to the end of this debt structure, you've got to stack the Bucher on there. The Bucher's not going to last out until 57. So now you're stacking even more on there. So I think it's important to know and to give people a realistic look at debt over time. It doesn't go away when you get a new project. You're stacking on top of what you're already doing. So I think that's kind of like what you're trying to get at as well. When you're looking at going to a vote and having somebody in another town where the structure doesn't exist and they don't quote benefit from it, they may not vote that second time. So, did I answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Gary.
Hi, Gary Cheeseman, One Select Board. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for the great presentation tonight. I hope the audience out there takes it to heart, these great numbers. One Select Board has been in favor of the consolidated solution from the very start. We reiterated at each Select Board meeting. One thing that comes up that's difficult to talk about, but is a reality today, is security. And certainly we see the deficiencies in our current schools, the fact that Cutler, our renovation, would not solve the problem that the fire department has no access to the backside of Cutler. So could you just give us the pros of a consolidated school based upon security needs?
Sure. Security is number one for me. It's a big deal. As someone who's formerly in law enforcement, I understand the power of these weapons that are out there today. Unfortunately, there is no real defense against some of these weapons that are being used around schools. And I think it's important to note that you can walk in any of our elementary schools and be in the building where the kids are. Any one of them. Walk in the front door of the Cutler School. You can take a right and be with the kindergarten kids without anybody intercepting you from the office, because the office is around the left corner. That came up in 2008, that came up in 2014 studies. When you go back to the Winthrop School, you walk in, you could be walking into a full cafeteria full of kids, because you walk right into the cafeteria. Bucher School, same thing. Go in the front door, they buzz you in, you can access, go right by the office and go into, left or right into the school. These are important factors that we talked about a lot with the police department, fire department, the designers, even how we did some of the landscaping, looking at open sight lines, trying to find ways to make sure the office was located so they could see who was coming. So police and fire had access. There are access areas on the roof that were specified for the police and fire in case of an emergency, and not just a fire emergency. The building actually closes down. The academic wings get closed down individually, so all 5 wings would get closed down individually, and then there's a steel security door that comes down right near the office to really seal off the building for safety and security. Each of the neighborhoods can be secured individually, and then the rest of the building can be separated. So there's really 7 sections of the building once the security system gets activated. We don't have that now. If this does not pass, that'll be the first thing I'm going to address in all of our schools, and that will be expensive, but realistic, needed, unfortunately. Part of the other security features is the glass. After Sandy Hook, the gentleman he had a company that designed a glass that's a little more difficult to access with a firearm. Do you remember the name of it? School Guard safety glass. And that is configured into this project because we feel like it's important. We want our kids to be safe and our staff to be safe. So safety has been considered all the way around. The road around the building is a safety feature as well as an access feature. Fire department's number one complaint was no access to water in the back of the building and can't get around the back of the building with a fire truck. So Cutler School right now, unless we could slide it forward 20 feet, they can't get a fire truck all the way around that building, which is a concern. They brought that up in the meeting when we met with the police and fire. There were 2 different meetings with the architectural team, safety people, our support, our police and fire departments in both towns, and everybody got to weigh in on those security features. That's a big piece of this puzzle for us. I think it solves all of our security problems in really one opportunity. Does that answer your question? Good.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Andrews. I live at 29 McGrath. I wanted to talk about what the cost of the taxpayers would be if the project fails and there are additional lawsuits and out-of-district placements for students because the district isn't meeting FAPE or isn't meeting IDEA. Thank you.
Great question. Part of the special ed service is really what's called FAPE, free and appropriate public education. And I said it earlier, kids in our community should go to school in our community. We should make every effort we can. That is not always possible. We have entered a discussion, I have entered a discussion with area superintendents about the realities of, is it cheaper to send certain special ed programs out of district and keep others in district because of the budget issues that are occurring right now. You're seeing cuts in almost every district around us due to increasing special ed transportation costs, out of district costs, and transportation costs in general. So you're starting to see some decisions being made where it's going to get expensive really quickly. An initial move of a child from our school into a landmark program is approximately $70,000 to $80,000. There are programs out there that, depending on the needs and severity of the needs of the children, they could be up to $300,000 annually, and we're responsible for that, and that comes out of the school budget. So even though they're not in our school district, we would have to pay to transport the child to a program, pay for the program, transport the child back. And if you haven't noticed, a lot of these new transportation companies popping up, these little vans and private cars with school bus signs on top of them, those are all coming to life because of the special ed transportation issue. It is a way to make a serious amount of money. There's just no way to get kids to all these places with one bus. You need all these smaller transportation companies to do that. It gets expensive quickly when you start to, we have currently 41 kids out of district, and if you looked at our numbers, we're in the millions of dollars. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying that's our responsibility as a community, but that could rise over time if we can't find the appropriate spaces and places for our kids. And these are kids that should remain in our district. It's just a matter of if our programs continue to grow, like we're splitting our castle into two. We're gonna split our ILP in the next 2 years probably into two. So all of a sudden, that's 2 more classrooms that can't be used for regular classrooms. Where do they go? So some tough decisions need to be made. And that's part of my job and special ed director's job and our business manager trying to figure out like, the best way to fit those pieces and puzzles together. We've been working with the State House on trying to increase that funding, and we're looking at the possibility of supplemental funding for this year's budget, because now the State House is starting to realize with all of the budgets being slashed around these communities in Massachusetts, that there's a need for a change in the Chapter 70 funding, which is how schools get their state monies from the state, a change in transportation reimbursement. So in the law, it really says that the state should be paying for 100% of out-of-district transportation costs, but it doesn't. It has never. Last year, I think it was 57%. And then you start to look at reimbursement, what they call circuit breaker, reimbursement for kids whose costs exceed a threshold, and it's a little, I can't remember the exact number, it's a little over $46,000 a year. Anything above and beyond that comes back to the community, but not for a year later. So it doesn't impact you right now. So those are all moving pieces of the puzzle with faith and keeping kids in district, and really working hard to make sure we have programs to meet the needs of all of our kids. And as we said, it's not always possible. I'm one of 20 superintendents who's on the board of the Northeast Consortium, and we work really hard to try to figure out how can we work together to isolate a program, say, in Ipswich, that we can all move kids to in a safe place, in a space that we're all aware of. It's still expensive. The transportation issue, we're working right now on a contract to meld together 15 or 18 different communities to say, all right, you have a kid going to this school, I have a kid going to this school, they have a kid going to school, one route instead of 3 different routes at $300 a day. So we're trying to look at it because now it's getting really quickly out of hand, it's starting to get really expensive, and that's just the reality of what's going on in special ed and public education in general.
Hey there, I'm Catherine Spano. I live on Linden Street in Hamilton. I just wanted to ask a question about the sort of idea of small neighborhood schools being better for smaller children. I've heard a lot of chatter about that, sort of we moved here for small schools, that sort of thing. I find the neighborhood issue to be a little bit confusing. I live down the street from the library, and Bucher's less than a mile, and Cutler is around a mile, and Winthrop is a little over a mile. I have a first grader at Cutler, but all of those felt pretty neighborhoody to me. They're all walkable. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that, and also to the idea that, are smaller schools better for smaller children, and how has that been built into the plan? Thank you.
Sure. To answer that question, the number one feature of our school district that benefits our children is our staff. The relationships our staff have with the kids really dictates how things will occur in the building. The design of the building, we heard that loud and clear about small schools. We want to be able to walk to school. Well, more than 2/3 of our elementary kids get bused. You can walk to the schools if you're within probably that triangle of the schools. You can walk to any of them. But I talked about enrollments earlier. The best example is the current kindergarten. Incoming kindergarten in the fall, there's 7 classes. I can't fit 3 in Winthrop, so I can put 2 in Bucher, 2 in Winthrop, and the third now is, instead of being in Winthrop, is going to go to Cutler. So some of those kids in your neighborhood or in the Winthrop neighborhood are gonna end up at the Bucher or the Cutler only because there's no seats available at their neighborhood school. It just works out that way. Kids that move in, families that buy a house in November and move in, end up saying, well, why do I have to send my kid? I live over on Asbury, why am I sending my kid to the Bucher when I can't send him to this school here? Well, there's no room. There's no space for, to do that with kids. And I think that's one of the problems that we're having with the smaller schools. School itself will be the same for kids. It's anxiety inducing for the adults. It absolutely is. You know, my child's going to this big school. We've designed the school to be small in neighborhood on purpose. It's very purposeful. And if you look at the left side of the building, go back to this slide here. If you look at that left side of the building, our first and second graders are really right there. They're stuck in that kind of small school feel. The CAF's there, music's there, art's there, science is there, the gymnasium is there, PT, OT is there, speech and language, TLC, all of those things are offered in that specific area of the building purposefully, because we do feel like, okay, we can make it smaller for our youngest learners, and they'll be fine. And they'll be fine. Because the adults we have working with them are the most important factor, I think. You know, welcoming, the feeling of belonging, the opportunity to bring all of our people together is amazing. To be able to have all our first grade teachers together and have conversations and talk about best ways to educate kids, what can we do for belonging, what types of community things can we do. That's a huge shift for us, where now it's hard to do in 3 different schools. So I think I understand the neighborhood feel, and you know, we moved here for the schools, but did you move here for the neighborhood schools, or did you move here for the quality of the schools? And I would say you moved here for the quality of the schools. And this school quality won't be diminished because it's bigger. I think, you know, there's several things will happen. We'll have a greater sense of belonging, both with our kids and our staff. I will be able to retain teachers much easier, to be able to have them come in safe, healthy environments every day and not have to worry about if there's a mouse in between my classroom walls, or if there's my ventilator's not working, so I'm opening all the windows, but it's 22 degrees outside. So, you know, I think the realities of what's happening in our small schools versus what we can do with this consolidated school are huge. It's a huge difference for everybody. Again, I will always go back to the one thing. When I was high school principal, it came up in accreditation. The number one thing that came up in accreditation, strangers came from other schools, came here and studied the school, and they looked at the environment. The first thing they always said is, the relationships between the teachers and the kids is unbelievable. And to me, that's been an easy horse to ride, because it's everywhere. I'm in every single school every week, and that's the strength in what we see in our building. It's not about, you know, the neighborhood classroom is, you know, your children are in cover school and it's a smaller school and they feel it. Kids will find their way. Kids will absolutely find their way. And I think, again, some of the angst comes from the adults, and I understand that. You know, some of us went to small schools. I didn't. I went to rather large schools, but some of us went to smaller schools growing up, and some of us in town went to these schools. I had a conversation in Honeycomb with a gentleman yesterday, and he's like, it's not the same school I went to 35 years ago. You know, so that's also a reality. I mean, think about it. Bucher doesn't even have a library. We took a classroom over to put a library space into the Bucher school. That's weird. So, where's an elementary school without a library? So we built this so that we had 5 libraries plus a central library. So each of these kids now has a library right in their neighborhood, right there in their neighborhood, in their learning space. So I think the way this has been designed is super thoughtful. And there were meetings with teachers, the visionary group, police, fire, and all the people to kind of bring that together. So I really think the idea of this being, quote, a big school is not a problem for the children and for our staff. They will make it and make it hum. I know they will. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I get passionate about that one. Hi.
I'm Bill. I'm Bill Sinha from 20 North Street. First of all, I want to thank you, of course, for the great presentation and the Q&A. I have several questions, and I agree, teachers are great. I have a graduating senior, and I have a 5th grader moving on to middle school
Yep.
next year. And so one of the things that she does after school is she goes to Cutler. So she meets up with her friends in the Cutler, after school, bikes over there and meets up and then has a lot of like fun time and
Yep.
lots of memories and all of that. The biggest question, and I mean, I came to know this a little bit late, you know, is how did the architecture of this come into being? You know, because I look at it, it looks to me, it looks a little incongruous to the rest of the town feeling, and because this morning also, in preparation of coming here, I also quickly looked at the Manchester. Somebody mentioned Manchester also consolidated their school, so I looked at that school as well. So this has a very like feel of, you know. So I mean, I know I sound a little, you know. I'm sorry about that, but
Don't be sorry.
Just
Don't be sorry.
curious about, and is the design totally fixed or can it be altered?
Yeah, so where we're at now is we designed this around the neighborhoods. I'm gonna go up the stairs again here. These neighborhoods were important pieces of the puzzle for us to answer the question that you had about it being kind of this big place. Each of these neighborhoods, there's one here on the first floor, one on the second floor, first grade, second grade, one here on the first floor, one on the second floor, and then one single floor back there. So 5 different neighborhoods where kids would go to school. And they, you know, for example, first grade, all would be right here. And they would literally stay, their classrooms are here, their supports are here, their special ed programs are here, the gym is here, the cafeteria is here, the music's room here. So we designed it specifically to mimic the small school feel within that space. And as kids grow older, so 5th graders currently work with 1st graders or 2nd graders as mentors. And part of that is still built into this program as we developed, you know, the neighborhood feel. We can mix our neighborhoods. You can put 2nd grade and 3rd graders in one neighborhood. You could put 4th graders and 5th graders in one neighborhood. You could separate them out individually and keep them apart. And I think the whole space of kids coming and playing, there's still, everything just moves to the right-hand side where kids play and hang out.
I do see a lot of parking space. I mean,
Yep.
I bring this up often.
Yep.
And also, so the five soccer fields, 3 of them are in the softball.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, which is where they are now. The soccer fields are in the outfield of the baseball diamond that's there, softball, baseball diamond that's there that the Little League uses. There are 2 fields there. There's 5 in this new layout. The other 2 are down on the far right hand side. So they're youth size. Soccer is a big deal in town, so we have a lot more demand for our soccer fields. It also happens to deal with soccer's in the fall, baseball, softball in the spring. So that's a good opportunity. And it's a play space for kids. You want to jump in?
Can I ask
These
a
guys
question?
want to jump in.
Yeah, I just had a question. I think you were talking a little more about how arranged.
Because, yes.
Doug wanted to
yeah,
tell you
that
how,
is actually
what,
one
I
of
thought
the
so.
biggest.
Doug Roberts, architectural team.
JCP Architecture.
I think it's an important question.
Thank you.
I
This
guess.
one?
Yeah. So the idea behind the architecture is we looked around the community. Closer to my mouth. Okay, now you can hear me. Thank you. We looked at the community. We wanted to break down the scale of the building. So we wanted to use familiar forms, which are the gabled forms of houses. And again, you'll see that each classroom wing are 2 gabled roofs to break down the massing of those wings. So it's a more residential, comfortable scale for the young learner. In addition, buildings integrated into the site, we have to deal with the topography. So each of those components is no more than 2 stories. So again, the architecture,
They do look very tall,
but again, it was very intentional to break down the scale of the building
okay.
so that it was more appropriate for the residential neighborhood and in keeping with the community.
Is that the midday sun?
I couldn't tell you exactly what time of day the sun was used. So it's rendering.
We have solar studies if you want.
Yeah,
We can get that for you. We have complete solar studies of the full year. glare studies, solar studies on what the building, how the building would act and react, and the things that they designed in to take advantage of the light. The natural light was a key design function for the team.
The other aspect too is the materials. Again, we wanted to use materials that were common throughout the community. Again, try to have it be better integrated into the neighborhoods and the Hamilton Wyndham communities.
Let me just tell you about the process. I think you,
I threw you a softball here, I don't think you hit it too hard. There were so many meetings where we discussed this, I'm passionate about it because I love architecture, I love driving through your Hamilton Wyndham neighborhood, it's beautiful. There was presentations put together by the architect for the building committee and anyone who wanted to come, and I believe they're online.
Yep.
Where they drove around Hamilton and Wyndham, and they had representative pictures that they showed the building committee. Here's a typical barn structure that we see here in Hamilton and Wyndham. And here's a typical older house, and here's a typical newer house. And then they showed the materials, and they helped the building committee come around to picking a brick type, a clapboard type, a roof profile that fit the neighborhood. It's tough to see on a 3D image, but they did it, and I think it's up on one of the barcodes if you hate it. That presentation on materials and how you came about was fantastic. It was diving into the community to really look at what it was made of, what it looked like, and then to try to complement it the best you could on a larger scale.
I think the other important piece, I'm going to use my outdoor voice again, the other important piece is where it's located, on the lowest point of the property. Right now, the current school is up on the top. This school is down low, so taking advantage of that height change in just the topography, so the building slowly climbs back up the hill instead of being this, that building was on top of the other hill. I think everybody would say, wow, that is a tower, not a building, but this is designed purposely to answer that question for people in the neighborhood, including with materials, and even that they brought pictures of houses, barns, stables, and trying to integrate light materials into, and a lot of glass. One of the big things we wanted to have was a lot of natural light for kids and staff, and the rooms are designed to do that as well. You're welcome. Fins up.
So I had a question to follow up on the security thing you were talking about a second ago. You were talking about you're really interested in making a new project of working on the security of the schools, and that this would again be an investment in the structure. One of the things that you'd spoken of in previous meetings was that we're limited by the state on what size project you do to improve any of these buildings before it triggers a requirement that you do the $45 million code compliance. So I think the number that you had said before is about $1.5 million. So if you tried to improve the security of the structures to the tune of more than $1.5 million, you'd have to do the full 40 some odd million. I was just wondering if the owner's rep would be able to tell us, is there an exemption for that sort of stuff?
So you're just talking about straight renovation. So if you're going in to do a repair renovation?
Right, well, if you said, look, we want to improve the security of the structure,
Yep.
and it's going to cost $2 million to do that, and the way you explained it previously was, no, as soon as you spend $1.5 million, you have to spend $50 million. You have to do all the code compliance. So I'm wondering, is there an exemption for a project like that, or would you have to do it?
So state law requires us to, if we open up a building and get into the 20% of the value of the building, how the town values it. So the school is a great example because I looked that one up. It's like $8.4 million is the value of their school to the town of Hamilton. Maybe we can talk about that later, but no. The $8.4 million, if you're looking at 20%, that's where the 1.6 came from. So if you start doing those repairs, that triggers two things: fire code, which would be sprinkler, and ADA compliance. So now you're into fire code and ADA compliance, and you're really making some significant changes within the building. And I think it becomes a mishmash if you don't go at it all at once. So I think it does trigger updates to code and fire safety. And the fire department is the determining factor ultimately, from what I've read in the law. But we had to do a sprinkler upgrade in the winter school already, part of the winter school. Part of the Cutler school, the newest part, has sprinkler, but you'd have to do the rest. So it would get expensive really quickly.
For the exemption part, I don't know of any.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I don't know off the top of my head.
authority having jurisdiction. Your police, fire, or building code official to take an exemption to a statewide building code, structural code, ADA code, that's not likely to happen.
So the upshot of this is that if you're a voter that thinks that you can vote no and then piecemeal do, small improvements over time to these structures, you won't be able to do a small improvement because it'll trigger a complete, requirement to bring it up to fire code, get it up to ADA code, which is the 40 some odd million dollars.
Again, not comfortable answering on behalf of the code official, but it is their jurisdiction, they have to make the call. And it is based on assessed value and value of work, and it's kind of hard to get out from under it. Again, who wants to be the guy that says, oh, okay, we'll look the other way on that, and then something happens? So that's the practical nature of it as well. Is that something you really want to do, to seek an exemption?
Yeah, you run into issues with some of the union groups as well. If you do a project trying to skirt around something, so plumbing is a good example. There are school districts that try to build new fields, build new tracks, multi-million-dollar projects, and said, no, we're not gonna build the bathrooms because we can't afford it. Well, the plumbers union stepped up and filed a claim with the state and said, hey, wait a minute, they have to because code says boom, 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 boom. So there's more than just localized watching. I think there are a lot of other groups watching as well. So I think, we're very careful now. What we do, we replace only the windows in the middle school, not all the frames, because we didn't want to start triggering something on our newest school, which is 26 years old. Other questions? All right, so I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I hope we've answered everybody's questions. We tried to get the questions that keep popping up in the community most often. Certainly if you have questions, let us know. Send me an email, jump on our FAQ site and drop the question in there. We'll be happy to work with our team to answer questions and get them out. We try to get them out within 48 hours of receiving them. But there's a ton of information on the website. There is a ton of information. There's a ton of information on both FinComs have done unbelievable work. The video you can watch is the Wenham video Finn and his team did February 5th and February 12th meetings of the FinCom are pretty informative if you want to learn about two things, why this project makes sense and math. Because they get into regression theory and I had to go back to some of my college days and think about, wait a minute, how does that work again? So thank you to Finn, thank you to John and his team for doing the work as well. So you have two different FinComs, two different communities, two different financial situations, both coming to the same conclusion. Two kind of independent groups, if you will. They don't work together. They've come to these conclusions at two separate times, actually. Because John had been on the committee, he had asked literally a million questions and had a lot of fodder to work with. Finn came on, you came on last year, right, as the chair? Yeah, so Finn's done a ton of work to really get the numbers out there. Take a look at those are there, they're public, they're on the websites. We come to the meetings, ask questions. These are public meetings, we're out there, we're not hiding, we wanna make sure. And then you gotta get, we gotta get to this next town meeting. We have an opportunity to decide what we're gonna do as communities and what we're gonna do on behalf of our children. So my hope is that we've answered all of your questions. I thank you for coming here tonight on this rainy, windy night. And certainly safe travels. And town meeting is now the 9th. So both of them are on the 9th. Hamilton is here at the high school in the gym, from what I heard, at 6:30 on the 9th. Wenham will be at the Bucher School in the gym, Natorium, it's called, the gym Natorium, where they always meet. Same night, same time. I will not be able to be at both, but I will do my best to figure out how to do that. So we want to make sure people are there to answer questions and help out with any issues that may pop up. But if you have any in between, please reach out.